everybody, and welcome to another episode of Blood on the Razor Wire TV, where we bring it to you real and we bring it to you raw. Today, I have a young lady named Taria who's on the show. She's been on the Van Jones show. She has a very special story because her son was murdered. Her son was a victim of a violent crime, and she ended up mentoring and still does mentor the person who killed her son. She spent some time in prison herself. You know, it's just an amazing story, but I'll let her tell you more about who she is and her situation. Terry, let the people know who you are and, tell them a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and, just your situation.
Well, my name is Taria Vandenherk, also formerly known as Taria Walters. I live here in Anchorage, Alaska. I've grown up here most of my life. We got here in 1977. When my parents brought me up here for the pipeline, when the pipeline was booming. Grew up in Fairbanks, left Fairbanks when I was about 18 years old. I was pregnant with my son and moved to Anchorage, which is the biggest city. And basically, when I was younger, I ended up in foster care at the age of 11, and it just steamrolled down from there. I just became a product of the system here in Alaska. Group homes, juvenile detention, and then eventually prison myself. My last sentence, I was sentenced to 20 years with 8 suspended for a drug conviction, first-degree drug conviction. I was manufacturing, and my teenage son was in the dwelling, and I was using drugs with my son at the time. And so they convicted me of giving drugs to a minor. And while I was in prison, I changed my life, but also while I was in there, I had some clarity and for the first time in my life, and I got clean and sober and started realizing who I truly was and my true identity and wanting to do something different. I didn't want to live the way that I had been grown up in, or that I had grown up as in the system, and living in a situation where I was just a product of the system and cash cow to them, like money in their pocket. And I wanted to be someone different. So I just buckled down when I was in prison, went to treatment, got clean and sober, and started educating myself while I was in the prison system and learning about case laws, and then also advocacy and becoming an advocate for people incarcerated. And then when I got out, I started doing advocating for recovery services and better treatment for people that are incarcerated.
Let me ask you this. How long have you been home now?
I got home May of 2010.
May of 2010. So you've been home a while. Let me ask you, let's talk a little bit about your son, right? Because, I don't know how you do it. I'm sure people watching this are probably saying, how could a person mentor the person that killed her son? Tell me a little bit about how your son was murdered and, how you were able to actually forgive this guy and be his mentor.
Well, first of all, I'm a believer in God, and I believe forgiveness is paramount to being able to walk through, tough things. And holding on to unforgiveness is extremely detrimental to a person when you want revenge. And of course, I'm not going to lie, I had anger and frustration in the situation when my son was killed. But when I went to prison, I surrendered and gave my life to God and really started understanding what forgiveness was, and then realizing that my son, forgave me for the things that I had done, and him offering me that mercy, and then also God doing that, and me being able to get a second chance, and how relieved and how that made me wanted to change, how that made me want to change. I needed to be able to offer that to other people. And my son, he had suffered with addiction issues, and partly because of the way that I had raised him. He ended up in foster care when I went to prison, and he was a good kid. He had straight A's in school. He had a girlfriend and was a skateboarder, and he'd always pick doing his studying for his tests and doing schoolwork over going and hanging out with his friends. And he graduated for the first time. Anybody in our family, nobody's ever graduated, actually gone all the way through, but he did. He actually became prom king. He was so proud of that. He was voted prom king, and then he ended up getting out of graduating high school and wanted to join the Navy, but then they rejected him because at the age of 14 he developed type 1 diabetes, and so they don't allow people in the military with diabetes. And his girlfriend went off and joined the military, so there was like some disconnect that caused a lot of depression. Him and her split up, and he started using. He relapsed, and then that was just the steamroll down from there. So, and I stuck by him. It was heartbreaking for me, and I felt like I was on the receiving end of what I had put him through, but now here I was on the role reversal trying to help my son, and it was difficult. He struggled for quite some time, got sober, and then got in a relationship with another girl and was hanging out with people he shouldn't have been hanging out with, and ended up relapsing again. And February of 2015, he was living with me. He ended up relapsing, and of course I asked him to move out. I gave him options, told him I'd help him with treatment, and he chose to move out and go stay in a motel. And then 3 weeks after he was gone, he got arrested. They raided his room, and then they ended up dropping the charges because he got the search warrant illegally. And he came back home, and then June 22nd, he walked out the door, and I'd suspected that he was using again because, when you are in recovery, you generally can tell when someone's using. And he didn't come home. And I searched for him for a day and a half, and I got the call about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning on June 24th, which is my daughter's birthday. And it was the state trooper that had arrested me 10 years prior for my drug case to come and tell me that my son had been found in his car. He had been shot in the back of the head, his car driven behind a fireworks stand in, a rural area, Big Lake, Alaska, really small, tiny town. And that he was gone. And I was devastated. It was like the air was sucked out of me. And it wasn't real. It just wasn't real to me. And in that moment, I knew in my heart that I just had this overwhelming feeling like God was saying, no matter who it is, you need to forgive them. And I had already forgiven the person without knowing who it was. But I knew that my son had died. I knew in my heart that it had to deal with surrounding drugs. And when I found out who it was, I went through a wave of emotions. I was mad. I was, devastated, and I had to walk through, sitting down with the district attorney and going over what his sentence was going to be. I didn't want to go through a trial because I didn't want to see my son dead in his car. I didn't want to see those pictures. I didn't want to have to walk through that. So I wanted to be able to offer, the opportunity for him to take a deal so that I wouldn't have to suffer, but also I wanted him to not spend the rest of his life in prison if he took it to trial and was found guilty.
Let me ask you this. How old was the kid that killed your son?
He was 30, I think. At the time, my son was almost 23.
And he told you, he ended up confessing to you and telling you, why he did it and all that stuff, right?
Not at first, no. It took a while for him to be accountable. In court, I forgave him. And I told him that I hoped that he got his life together and that he embraced recovery, because I knew that it was possible, and to not to waste his time, that he had an opportunity to do something with his time. And I know that it's possible because I did it. I did it while I was in. And I sat down with him June of 2018 or August of 2018. He was arraigned on my son's birthday. He was sentenced on my son's birthday 2 years later. And then I wanted to be able to have a conversation with him around my son's birthday, which August 14th, 2018, I sat with him at Spring Creek Correctional Center in Seward, Alaska, and we had a conversation. And he still was not fully accountable. And when I saw the actual docuseries and his conversation with the stuff that I did not see, he was denying and denying. He said he set him up. He's like, not fully owning it. But I had in my heart that I felt like even if he did not own it or if he was not accountable, I felt like I still needed to walk through this with him and just believe that over time he was going to come to a place of accountability and that his life was going to change. When I watched the documentary, I was upset, not only with, the situation with my son, but I was upset with the system of what led this guy to become a drug addict and him being a gang member. I learned that he grew up in an Amish community on a dairy farm. His dad was an entrepreneur. They drove horse and buggy, and then they came to Alaska when he was a teenager. And he ended up buying a drag car from his dad. And he's not Amish, but he grew up in the Amish community. He bought a drag car from his dad, and he drove it on the street, and he eluded police. And they sentenced him to 3 years for eluding a police officer. And they sent him to the maximum security prison, where he became a gang member and a drug addict, and then released him into the community to continue to recidivate over and over again, and stealing to feed his drug habit that he got while he was in prison, and it just kept over and over and over again. And so I had some kind of, after watching that, I was like, I believe that he could come to a place of like changing his life. And I told him that I would be willing to help him with that because I understood what it was to be in prison. And I also understood what it was like to struggle with addiction and making choices that you normally wouldn't make if you were sober. He took his to a high level, like extremes.
I'll tell you this. I mean, I commend you for being a strong woman and a person that found empathy in her heart and forgiveness, man. It's just amazing that, I don't know, I do these videos and, I try to save kids. I don't know if I'd be able to do what you did. So I definitely commend you on that. Let's talk a little bit about your time in prison, because you're the first woman I ever had on the show, right? And I guess when I was in prison, there was times where I thought about, I wonder what women's prisons are like. I wonder if they act like these dudes in here. I mean, was there violence in a woman's prison? Was there fighting? Was there gangs? I mean, were they stabbing each other in there? Like, what goes on in a woman's prison there in Alaska?
It's a lot different than a men's prison. Women are more catty and verbal. They talk a lot. And there were fights. Yes, there was the moments where, you'd get out of the camera view, take somebody in the bathroom, or, take them into the bathroom in the gym, or there was fights around the corner where there's, no one could see anything. And there wasn't, when I was in, there was not a lot of, I never had anybody, nobody incarcerated ever stabbed, but I did, when I was in, there was an officer that was stabbed by somebody that was mentally ill, and then my friend ended up getting the woman off of the officer. And there was situations like that. But as far as like massive violence that I've heard my husband even tell me about, stuff that goes on in in the men's prison, it's not the same. A lot of stuff that I've witnessed was more a lot of the women that I did time with were severely traumatized. They had come from, abusive backgrounds, whether it be home life or they were in unhealthy relationships, had addiction issues. A majority of them had been sexually assaulted, so they had a lot of, emotional problems. A lot of them wanted to surround each other. There was the moms, and then there was the girlfriends, getting into relationships, mostly for comfort. And as far as like things that I witnessed in regards to any kind of abuse going on, there was several times that I personally had frustration with the system as far as like how the officers would treat people that were in their care. Several people had been medically neglected, and I'm sure this happens all over the country, medically neglected. Some of them have died, got MRSA, had seizures, but then also when I was in, there was an officer that was caught having a relationship with somebody incarcerated, but he went around and he even hit on me, but I was like, I was not having it. And he ended up getting arrested. The girl that I knew, she was actually a role model inmate, and they ended up taking everything from her and took her to the hole. And they punished her for it, and which technically in the state of Alaska is a crime. And those that are incarcerated are considered to be, vulnerable, and it's because of the positions of power. There cannot be any kind of consent, so there has to be some, integrity with the officers. And I'm still hearing that those stories are happening today. It has escalated as far as like, deaths in the prisons. And then just recently, this last February, I've had conversations with several people messaging me things that's going on inside the institution. And the recent one was an officer that was having women sign contracts saying that they were his slave and he was their master, and they were doing all kinds of, he was doing sexual things with them.
Well, I mean, what was it? So the officer's got these chicks signing contracts and he's doing these sexual things. What was he giving them in return that would make them even think that they should be signing a contract?
I don't know, but I can only assume, because I've been being in prison myself. Generally, situations like that, there's always contraband involved, drugs being brought in. And so, that's the only thing I can assume. I did have a conversation with the lawyers, and my frustration is that there's only been a civil action, and this officer has not been charged criminally. And when I talked with the attorneys, they said we took the case because there was enough evidence to prove our case. Otherwise, we wouldn't have taken it. Well, if that's the case, then why isn't there any accountability for the officer that was doing this? And so, yeah. And another thing that, when I first was arrested, I was actually beat up by the officers. I was detoxing. And at the time, when I was young, I worked in the adult industry, and I ended up getting breast implants. And when I was arrested, I had implants, and I was suicidal, and the officers came in and was like, slammed my head into the pavement. I'd been in jail maybe 2 or 3 days. And then dog piled on me. I weighed about 120 pounds. And I was crying and screaming, and they were pushing on my back, and I kept saying I couldn't breathe because they were pushing so hard. And then I could feel the implants. It was hurting, and I was like screaming and telling them, and they just kept pushing harder and laughing, thinking it was funny. Well, a year later, I started getting sick, and I didn't know why. I started getting rashes all over my body. And of course, I had such a long sentence, I ended up having to be taken on outside medical I had to be on a special diet, and they could not figure out what was wrong with me, but I was getting intolerant to all these things, and my body was like, I had headaches all the time. Well, when I got out in 2010, it just progressively got worse. And in 2013, I started losing my hair. I broke out in blistering rash all over my body down to my feet. And then in 2014, I figured out what it was. The implants were ruptured in my body. And so I believe, can't prove it, but I believe that one incident, that the officers, when they did that to me, ruptured the implants, and it just was, deteriorating my body over the years. And I've had to have 2 surgeries. I have a permanent illness from it. I still break out in hives. My hair falls out, and I have intolerances to food and, gasoline, certain hair products, all of that. So
Let me ask you this, because I had Toby on, and Toby, and your whole system over there in Alaska. I mean, it seems like it's pretty vicious over there, man. Where they're beating dudes up and all that, and the hole that he was in, and your husband's in prison down there in Alaska right now, serving a sentence. I mean, has he ever had things like that done to him while he's been in there?
oh yeah, he's told me some stories. He's changed his life, but when at one point he was a, active gang member, and when there's allegations of being a leader and all of that, something happens on the yard, then automatically the leader's blamed and they're taken to solitary confinement. And even if he was not even directly involved, or he was not even on the same yard or anything like that, he was still blamed for it. And he got into a verbal altercation in 2012 with an officer at the maximum security prison, because this officer was being, disrespectful to people that were, that he was overseeing. And they did a peaceful sit down several times. People wrote, cop outs to the staff saying, remove this guy, this and that, and nothing was done. And then my husband ended up getting into a verbal altercation with the officer. They argued, and then it de-escalated. And then the officer said, okay, well, I can't let everybody see you acting like this, so why don't you just go to your room? We'll do 3-hour lockdown, no foul, no harm, and we'll call it, good. And as soon as he did that, obviously there's cameras in the main area. If he was a threat, he wouldn't have walked to his room and locked down. And he called in as soon as my husband locked down and said that his life was threatened, and they came in, bum rushed him, sprayed him, and he's like, if you're coming in here, you're going to have to extract me. And he ended up being extracted, taken to solitary confinement. And that next day, that officer brought a knife into the facility, got an altercation with 3 other people, a physical altercation with other gangs, and he ended up stabbing 2 inmates.
Hold on. I gotta.
I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? Okay. I gotta stop you, because you said the officer stabbed 2 of the prisoners?
Yeah. Yep.
Are you kidding me?
No, and my husband, he recently even had a conversation with other officers about this, but the situation was, the guy, when it happened, the other officers went over and removed the knife and placed it with a pen, but then of course they had to take the inmates to the hospital, and of course medical staff is like, this is not a pen stab, this is a knife stab. And so they had to come out and say, and then the officer was like, oh, I was feeling threatened, and the leader of the gang was threatening me, but my husband was in the hole. And I'm sorry, but if you feel threatened, then you would go to your superiors and be like, I don't feel comfortable working my post, can you put me somewhere else? But I feel that this guy, from what my husband said and other people that I've talked to, he just wanted to show him who was boss, and came in with the knife and got into a verbal altercation again, and then a physical one, and he stabbed in the inmates, and he never was charged for it. That's a felony, and he was fired, but my understanding, he got his pension. So, and that's just one incident. And my husband spent 3 years in solitary confinement for something that he was not even involved in.
Well, I mean, that's that's one of the craziest stories I heard. Besides, guards getting raped during riots, but for a cop to come in with a knife and stab the prisoners, I mean, where the hell are we at? What I mean, some people might be watching. Well, the prisoners stabbed the guards. Yeah, I mean, but you really don't see guards stabbing prisoners. You know what I mean? I just think that's outrageous. So, from the things that you said, you had a rough life, you had a rough upbringing and stuff like that, and there's a lot of there might be some girls that are on the wrong path. This ain't Scared Straight or 60 Days In or any of that stuff, but if you could talk to them young girls that are on the wrong path. I know you talked about the adult industry. I know that you ran an escort service before, using drugs. What would you tell them girls that are on the wrong path and 14, 15-year-old girls right now?
Probably what I would have told myself, knowing what I know now. Well, I'm an advocate today, and I advocate for people incarcerated. And I really wish I would have known what I know now, and that is that I am the captain of my ship, and I can be whoever I want to be. And do I have regrets? Yes, I have regrets, but then I also have situations where I believe that I wouldn't be the person I am today without learning the things that I had, or going through the things that I had to go through, so that I could help other people. What I would say to anybody that's walking down that path, young teenage girls, or even young women, is follow your dream. You have a dream, figure out what that dream is, and chase after it. And because living this, like the living in the game and living in the lifestyle of corruption or crime or anything like that is not where it's at, because it always ends up in either you're dead or you're in prison, and it's a lonely path. And today I work a job, I'm regular job, but I'm also an advocate, and I advocate for people that are incarcerated, coming out of incarceration. I advocate for restorative justice processes. And then I also, find ways to always educate myself in anything that I'm interested in learning about. This past lockdown, when we had COVID, I spent $3,500 in learning how to trade stocks, because I was like, hey, I got to learn how to make money from home because I don't have a job right now and I'm living on unemployment. And so I took this class and I learned how to trade stocks. So I not only do I go to work now and I was able to go back to work, but I trade stocks at home. And cryptocurrency. And so there's things that I'm always trying to progress in my life by stepping into always learning something. I'm 48 years old, and I believe that I'm always going to be learning something till the day I die, and embracing that, but not chasing after the things that I know that are going to harm me, but chasing after the things that I know are going to be beneficial to me in my future, but also beneficial to others, my granddaughter, my daughter, and being a light to other people, and always helping out and caring for others.
Really, I'm going to get ready to end the show, but, really, I should be thanking you for allowing me to interview you, because, I think, just from our short conversations, and I mean this, I don't say this lightly, I think you're an amazing person, an amazing woman. You stick by your husband while he's incarcerated. I commend you for that, but more than anything, I can't even imagine what it's like to lose your son, to violence, and, I'm certainly sorry that, that you were a victim of that. But man, just your heart to be able to forgive, because I believe in second chances, man. I believe that, all people can be redeemed, So really, I thank you for that, for being the person that you are. And, hopefully, we'll, maybe we can come back for a part 2. Is there anything you want to say before we close?
Yeah, I appreciate being able to come on here and share my story. And I just really, encourage everybody to not forget about people that are incarcerated, they are citizens of our community, and they do come back, and to always find ways to help them transition back into the community and uplift them and care about them, because they're just as valuable as somebody that's not in prison. And not to ever give up, even if in that moment, they may not be accountable or changing right when you want them to, but have the hope and the belief that someday, that no matter what, even if you stick around and you constantly feed into their life, that something's going to click and they're going to be like, okay, I'm having my aha moment. So always have faith, always have hope, and always give love.
That's what's up. And with that, I'm going to tell everybody, hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, share the video, because someone might need to hear this story. And with that, we're out until tomorrow. Blood on the Razor Wire TV.